Welcome, everyone. My name is Basil Zimmerman. I'm from the Confucius Institute at the University of Geneva. My colleague Blaise Dupuis just gave me the green light, meaning we can start this conference today, this research seminar talk, which is, you can also attend live on both YouTube and Zoom, and it's recorded, just so that everybody knows it will be available as well later.
Just the presentation.
Only the presentation. Okay, so then no pressure, only on Dandan, the pressure. So just a very quick reminder of this talk series. So it's part of the Déjeuner Sociology, which is a research seminar of the Department of Sociology at the University of Geneva. And for this semester, the Institute of Sociological Research actually is hosting the Déjeuner Sociologique. And this semester, they wanted to work with Asian studies scholars to organize some kind of dialogue. So they invited the Confucius Institute and also the Department of East Asian Studies. And so myself, my colleague Maya Todeschini in Japanese Studies, and Blaise, we work together on this. And today we are very happy to welcome Dandan. Dandan is visiting PhD students from Nanking University, the School of Journalism and Communication. For those who are not familiar with Chinese universities, it's in the top 10. It's one of the big famous universities in China. Her PhD is on game studies, online games, but today is not about her PhD. Dandan has many research projects. This one is on migration, migrants, Chinese migrants in Switzerland. She came to Geneva to work with Professor Sandro Catachin, which is with us today. So it's part of the ongoing discussion, if I understood well. And we have the pleasure to also have Professor Marilyn Libert from the Institute of Gender Studies and also Department of Sociology as our discussant. So I just stop here and I give the floor to Dandan. As usual, we start with the presentation, then we have a Q&A only with the discussant, and then we open to the audience, both online and here in the classroom.
Oh, many thanks for Basil's kind introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm Dandan from Institute of Sociological Research. And just as Basil introduced, I'm also from Nanjing University in China. And it's a great honor for me, actually, to stand here to share one of my research, which has been done under the guidance of Professor Sandro Catachin since I came to Geneva this February. And the topic is about Chinese migrants in Geneva. The title is The Gradual Hybridization of Belonging. So this presentation is divided into 5 parts. The introduction, the conceptual framework, methodology, findings, and finally, the discussion and conclusion. The first part, introduction. Actually, I hold an opinion that the globalization and localization are positive correlation. That means for this study, we can obviously say that Chinese migrants in Geneva, this study is an obvious case study, but to be more specific, it is a typical case study of globalization, according to the definition made by a sociologist, Giddens. And why I choose Geneva and Chinese migrants as my research object, besides the reasons of my own research convenience. The reason of Geneva is that Geneva is the really highest ritual of immigrants and naturalizations city, and in the immigration countries, Switzerland, it's so special. And this is a part of Geneva. And for the part of Chinese immigrants, actually, it's the 3rd largest international migration groups in the world, all over the world. But when Geneva meets Chinese migrants in Geneva becomes a totally untypical group. And now there are some new situations and some new changes in the COVID-19 epidemic era. Information communication and technology plays a more and more important role in people's daily life. There's no doubt about that. And especially for migrants' everyday life, many aspects of their life has been constructed, not only about the migration experience, but also emotion and belonging. So based on this, what are the series of my research questions? The first question is, what are their living condition? The Chinese migrants in Geneva's living condition. This is a research representation of this study. And second one is, how do they build or rebuild or maintain the links between Geneva and the city of their origin, or maybe containing the places in their migratory career, especially via the media practice of their everyday life. And the last one, based on the two questions above, I wanted to reflect on the post-migration era. Are there any new migration characteristics happened in this new era? So about the conceptual framework, actually, I just wanted to construct a conceptual draw. So for this draw, the ethnic of this draw is the theory of Michel de Sardou, the practice of everyday life. Mostly I based on this. And according to many sociological scholars, there is an academic turn from the nature of structure of social dynamics to everyday life of ordinary people. According to Michel de Sardou's opinion, a society is constituted by certain practice. That means if we wanted to look at a society, look at the social of the society, it may be a great way to just look at ordinary man's everyday life. So that is also the basic logic of this research. And according to that, I put forward a new concept based on Michel de Sardou's theory, everyday practice and media tactics. Everyday life events itself with external resources in countless possible ways. So I just wanted to explore, besides the way Chinese migrants work in the city, just as Michel de Sardou believes, how do they work in the media space? And what are their media practices and their social and emotional links, how they present such kind of things. So for the methodology part, actually, I try to balance the representativeness and typically. And now I show you, I try to convince you how I did. First, I adopt the methods, questionnaire collection. I use a questionnaire as a pretext and finally connected 34 questionnaire about newcomers. And what about Chinese newcomers? I will explain later. And the second method is also I did at the same time is a qualitative research. I did 37 in-depth interviews. And finally, online ethnography via observation from WeChat Chinese app, WeChat circles and 8 WeChat groups. All these 8 WeChat groups are owned by Chinese migrants in Geneva. And the main method of the research is qualitative research, the 37 in-depth interviews, and why there is 34 questionnaires and why there are 37 interviews. That's the reason. Yes, the similarities of all the interviewees. There are 34 interviewees have lived in Geneva for 1 to 8 years, which I call them newcomers. And while another 3 interviewees have lived in Geneva for more than 18 years. Another 3 persons, these 3 interviewees, I did the interviews about them just for the purpose of to collect the history of Chinese migration from China to Geneva. That's the only purpose. And all the 37 interviewees, they are all adults over 18 years old. Just try my best to guarantee they can express themselves well. And they now still live in Geneva. And in this research, I also try my best to exhaust all types of interviewees in different dimensions as much as possible. So that's their differences from the 4 aspects: nationality, gender, age, and occupation. For nationality, all the 37 interviewees, there are 32 migrants of Chinese origin, including Hong Kong, Taiwan, and there are 2 Japanese Chinese, 1 French Chinese, 1 Malaysian Chinese, and 1 from others. And about the gender, there are 12 male Chinese migrants and 25 female Chinese migrants. Okay, but gender is not the main issue of this research. And the age ranges from 22 to 60 years old. And finally, the occupation, all the interviewees, they are international organization workers, they are restaurant owners or restaurant workers or doctors, lawyers, bank staff, and even students. So based on all these methods introduction, I wanted to draw a general social demographics picture. So about the demographics, according to the Federal Statistics Office, the situation is on December 31st, just last year. And we can easily say that the percentage of Chinese migrants, both in Switzerland and Geneva, are totally mineral growth. So, and FSO, they count the numbers only according to nationalities. I really believe that they actually try their best to be more accurate, but there are still a little bit errors to a certain extent existing. According to one of my interview, he told me that there are not too many Chinese migrants here, and they are from Taiwan, Hong Kong, mainland China, Southeast Asia, Japan, and Chinese from European and American countries. The total is just over 2,000. So including overseas Chinese whose nationality is not China, there are only about 500 people more than the FSO statistic. That's the errors, yes. And the way for Chinese migrants in Geneva themselves, the way they to identify their Chinese friend, their Chinese migrants, just according to Chinese language cipher and Chinese appearance. So we can make a conclusion, just an easy one. It is impossible to use numbers to show it in general terms, but there is still reference value for how many interviewees to select according to FSO statistic. Yes, and one thing must be mentioned that FSO defined the migrants just according to their residence permit. Chinese migrants who hold a residence permit over 12 months can be considered as a migrant. Yeah. And each Chinese migrant is a personal migration career and a migration encyclopedia carrying the scenery, emotions, and knowledge of their era from which Chinese migrants with different growth backgrounds and personality characteristics originated. It is more important to collect each interviewee's narrative and their migratory career during the offline questionnaire collection process. And putting their stories together is an actual way of preserving historical memory. That's my opinion. So the next step is, how did I deal with all types of data? Actually, to be a little bit rough, there are only two types of data I have. One is statistic data, and another one is other textual materials, including questionnaires, transcriptions, and online text copied from WeChat groups and WeChat friend circles. So I just coded all this data in 4 categories: the diachronic change of social identity, the subjective perception of success and failure, the legal status, the time dimension, based on the 3 concepts of migratory career, daily media practice, and the sense of belonging. And one thing must be mentioned, that there is a data anonymization using pseudonyms. That's important. And then we come to the finding parts, maybe interesting. Just briefly, just to be a little bit brief, there are 3 findings: Chinese migrants in Geneva, and typical word, the migratory career of Chinese migrants in Geneva, types, location, differences, and the growing importance of the online community under COVID-19, more emotional and less physical context with China. So actually the word atypical, at the beginning, I tried to use this word to describe the features of Chinese migrants in Geneva. It's inspired by one of the speeches of Professor Madeline Liebers in 2015, yes. And at that time, she used this word to describe the features of Chinese migrants in Switzerland. But for me, to be more detailed, I wanted to say that, and I must say that the Chinese migrants in Geneva is a little bit different from Chinese migrants in Switzerland. And then I just reconstructed the atypical world based on the comparison. So for Chinese migrants all over Europe, they have some similarities. Most of them are from Zhejiang province and Fujian province in China, and most of them migrate for a better job opportunities, and they tend to help each other. But for Chinese migrants in Geneva, compared to the Chinese migrants in other parts of Europe, Chinese migrants in Geneva, there are no large-scale Chinese migrants association existing in Geneva, and there are no community buildings existing in Geneva, for example, the famous Chinatown and even the Heidos. And for Chinese migrants, who come to Geneva in search of higher salaries, they really have long-term residence plans. And as for the Chinese migrants all over the Switzerland, there are almost no illegal migration exists, and they are highly educated, most of them. For Chinese migrants in Geneva compared to other parts of Switzerland, most of Chinese migrants in Geneva, their work is related to international organizations. It's even some Chinese restaurant owners, they are running their Chinese restaurants after their retirement of their work in the international organizations. And the history of Chinese migration in the city of Geneva is closely related to Chinese diplomatic process. It is easy to understand. So for other groups in Geneva, for all the ethnic groups in Geneva, they are all keen to run specialty restaurants. And due to Switzerland's special national conditions and Geneva's international diplomacy attributes, they really feel discrimination. And for Chinese migrants in Geneva, most of them are highly educated and almost no illegal migration existing. And they do not abandon using Chinese social media, no matter how long they stay in Geneva. So what are their types, location, and differences? I just tried to mapping Chinese migrants in Geneva according to migratory career. The first one is the diachronic change of social identity. There is a series of dual growth or dual changing. Decline in self-identity, no decline in self-identity, or decline in social identity, no decline in social identity, decreased sense of self-dignity or not decreased sense of dignity, or felt discrimination or not felt. For the last one, felt discrimination, there are only 2 interviewees in this research told me that they felt something uncomfortable in Geneva. But other interviewees told me that the feeling of discrimination is only about yourself. It is related to how you deal with such a kind of discrimination or the things that make you comfortable. And for the subjective perspective of success, the source may be from Chinese society and also from Geneva society. And they will also come from the family and friends from China or family and friends in Geneva. It may also from online virtual space, but also offline reality. And about the identification knowledge of citizen legal status, they may incorporate into local media life and political life after their various experience of migratory career. And they will also keep the attitude of exclusion of the local political life because of habits of Chinese people in China. And about the time, for the individuals themselves, maybe they don't want to go back China at first, and as time going by, they wanted to go back to China. But now maybe most of them will find it's hard to go back to China because they don't have the capability to go back to China because of their family reasons, their the strict policy of China, something like that. And there are also differences between Chinese migrants groups. And the last findings, the growing importance of the online media, more emotional and less physical contact with China. Traditionally, just as most ethnic groups, migration ethnic groups all over the world, for Chinese migrants in Geneva, the way for them to keep both emotional and physical contact with China is just like spending their vacation time, returning to the city of origin to renew with their relatives, parents, wives, husbands, children. And for their relatives, they can fly to Geneva after retirement or just on holidays, like famous and interesting flying grandmas. And a little bit, not so related finding is that for these Chinese migrants, they told me that they don't want to report the good news, but not they want to report the good news, but not the bad news during the communication with their relatives and friends in China, not because of their self-dignity, but because they don't want their parents or their elder parents and their friends in China worry about their living conditions in Geneva. And for those who came to Geneva, didn't bring their children or child with them at first, their children may only have the ability to speak Chinese, but not write Chinese characters. And the new change under the COVID-19 epidemic, or the practical dilemma they faced, is that for Chinese migrants to Geneva, they couldn't just fly to China anytime they want in the past because of the test and quarantine required for all inbound passengers in China. And for the relative, the Chinese and Japanese governments have reduced their entry policies, and the Swiss government has also canceled the tourist visas. And the process of visas for visiting relatives is quite difficult for many Chinese elderly who could not speak and recognize foreign language. The finding is that in this period of stillness, we are all trust local. And it doesn't make a difference if the family is 1,500 or 50 kilometers away. Then the transnational media, especially Chinese owned information communication technologies, played an unprecedentedly important function at this time. There's no doubt about that. So to be more specific, Chinese migrants to Geneva, they keep the emotional and physical links with China and Geneva from these three aspects: the knowledge, language, and life habits. For the knowledge, there are two types of media can bring knowledge to them, or they just feed back to the knowledge. First one is Chinese social media, for example, the famous WeChat. And the second one is newcomers. Actually, newcomers themselves are media. They are just a container of the information. So it is actually and logically a flow of information works. And for language, most of Chinese migrants living in Geneva, they don't want to abandon Chinese language, and they will constantly teach their child or children to learn how to speak and how to speak Chinese language, because they wanted to communicate with such three type groups of people, with their child or children, both online or offline, no matter their child or children live in Geneva or live in China. And they also wanted to communicate with relatives or friends in China that must be online. And they also wanted to communicate with relatives or friends in Geneva. This may be online and maybe offline, for example, the city rituals. And for their life habits, there are online and offline rituals. For example, Chinese migrants to Geneva, they like to have food in Chinese restaurant, but they can also have food in other types of restaurant. And after any time they finish their meal in the restaurant, most of them wanted to show the pictures in their WeChat friend circles. So this is happened at the same time. And for the festivals, actually Chinese migrants in Geneva, they celebrate both festivals of China and festival of Switzerland or Geneva. And the cuisine made by themselves. Actually, what is interesting is that most of interviewees in this research, they told me that they really do the cuisine made by themselves at China, but since they came to Geneva, they try to make it by themselves. But how could they do that? Because there's no experience. They just look for the video or the text in the WeChat groups, or in the WeChat friend circles, or they just find another Chinese media. For example, 下厨房 means kitchen apps, Chinese kitchen apps, or they can find the videos on the YouTube, a Chinese food making videos in the YouTube. So this is a picture. This is this one is mooncakes made by a Chinese restaurant in Geneva to celebrate the Chinese Mid-Autumn Festival. And the above one is Chinese xiaomai, is a kind of Chinese food, also made in Chinese restaurant in Geneva to celebrate the Swiss National Day. Then we come to the most important part of my research, the shaping progress of the hybrid belonging. Just take food making as an example. At the original state, from when the Chinese migrants came to Geneva, the sense of belonging to the city of origin of China may be the most important one in their mind. I think so. Yes, for example, they just keep the memory of native Chinese taste, maybe because of the homesickness. And the sense of belonging to Geneva and other city outside of China, if it existing in their migratory career, well, just to take a little bit small percentage. For example, they may just some new condiments and ingredients, and they find something new to make Chinese meal. And later, as time goes by, the compilation of migratory career of China to Geneva process, their belonging become gradually blurred and abstracted. The sense of belonging to Geneva has been strengthened, and the sense of belonging to the city of origin in China will be weakened. And there are also existing interferences, the sense of belonging to other cities besides Geneva and cities in China. And the next step is when the media interaction works as a series of tactics in their everyday practices. The sense of belonging to the city of origin in China, just like I put forward just now, for example, they learn something from Chinese, they learn how to make Chinese food in the YouTube. The sense of belonging to the city of origin in China may be strengthened once again, and the sense of belonging to Geneva may be just weakened, strengthened, just a dynamic circle. And for the interferences, the sense of belonging to cities other than Geneva and cities in China, but existing in their migratory career, I think in this period is not as important as the last stage. The last one, finally, the gradually hybridization of belonging was constructed. So there is a circle, and it contains both the sense of belonging to the city of origin in China, the beginning of their migratory career, and also contain the end of their migratory career till now, the sense of belonging to Geneva. And it may be also contains the sense of belonging to cities other than Geneva and the city of origin in China. So this is all happened during the migratory career. To make a conclusion, actually, during the interviews process, some interviewees just put forward an interesting question, and they asked me, do you think there are surely Chinese communities existing in Geneva? At that time, I couldn't give them an answer, but now I wanted to say, maybe, yes. In the past, especially before the COVID-19 epidemic, there are two communities, Chinese communities in Geneva. One is the Chinese Bible Church, and the other one is the Sing Grove. But the Chinese Bible Church now, it still works. But the Sing Grove, due to the strict policy for the parties or gathering of Geneva, the Sing Grove disappeared during the COVID-19 epidemic. But I just try to make an assumption that could we say that there are surely such kind of communities existing in Geneva as a form of online WeChat groups, because there are numerous WeChat groups existing in Geneva. They play the same function. So based on this, I wanted to say behind the hybridization of belonging, actually, it is the information working. So this is the information logic, not only for the city of Geneva, but also for the city of origin in China and other cities existing in their migratory career. Chinese migrants in Geneva just bring the knowledge. They are the container itself. So they just bring the knowledge from China or from other cities, and via WeChat or via other types of social media in China. And then they use WeChat or offline rituals to put all this knowledge and information to the city of Geneva. And the city of Geneva, how do city of Geneva influence Chinese migrants in Geneva? It influenced Chinese migrants in Geneva via the special spaces. This special space is not existing in offline, but also online. For example, Chinese migrants working in the cities and Chinese migrants working in the media space. That's what I wanted to say. So it's just information play a role in their everyday practices. Just to make a brief summary, this research just tried to tell a story about globalization and localization. Under this background, how Chinese migrants in Geneva use information communication technologies, especially Chinese social media such as WeChat during their migratory career, and how they deal with such kind of different things under the COVID-19 epidemic. So this is the issue not only about the gradual hybridization of belonging, but it's also about media practice of everyday life. Yeah, that's what my story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dandan. It was very impressive. Dandan also attends our doctoral seminar, so I was not surprised, but because I'm now almost familiar with this kind of demonstration. So we have our discussion today. So I'll stop here and I'll give the floor, the screen to Marie.